Probability is a mathematical measure of the likelihood of a particular event occurring. Numerically, we give probabilities a value between 0 for absolutely impossible and 1 for absolutely certain. We often describe these values as percentages, 0% for will never happen and 100% for certain to happen. Of course, as well as numbers, we often describe probabilities using other words, like 50-50, which bears an obvious relationship to 50%, possible, likely, unlikely, probable, most likely, even words like perhaps, might, maybe, could, usually, generally. The exact placement of many of these words along this scale is somewhat ambiguous, and to be honest, that's why we need to describe probability using numbers instead. Experimental probability is measured by calculating the relative frequency of a certain event occurring. Experimental probability is based on actual experimental outcomes. You try the experiment many times and you calculate the relative number of times that the outcome you are interested in occurs. For example, if Ben is a pistol shooter who hits the target 72 times out of 80 shots, then the experimental probability of Ben hitting his target is defined as the relative frequency, the number of on-target shots, 72, out of the total number of shots, which is 80. That's 9/10 of the time, or 90% probability. Or as a number between 0 and 1, it's 0.9. Or, suppose I have a bag full of marbles. I'm going to pull one marble out of the bag at a time, and put each one back and shake up the bag before pulling out the next. If I do that 50 times, and I get a green marble 13 times out of those 50 draws, then what's the experimental probability of getting a green marble? Well, it's the relative frequency, the number of times I got a green marble, over the total number of times I tried. 13 out of 50 is 26%, or 0.26. You can express it in any of these three ways. Notice that the experimental probability has nothing to do with the actual number of marbles in the bag, green or otherwise. Experimental probability is based only on the outcome of doing the experiment many times. For experimental probability, you have to first do the experiment. You can even calculate experimental probability from a graph of the data. Here's a histogram of the results of a survey of houses in a particular suburb. If you were to choose a house in this suburb at random, what would be the experimental probability that the house you chose has at least 4 people living there? Well, the experimental probability is the relative frequency of the event of interest. Here are the houses with at least 4 people. 2 outcomes, with a total frequency of 15 plus 8, or 23. The number of trials is the total number of houses surveyed, which is the sum of all the frequencies in the graph. 1 plus 4 is 5, plus 10 is 15, plus 15 is 30, plus 8 makes 38. So the relative frequency is 23 over 38, which is about 60.5%. You can use the relative frequency to predict the number of times a particular event will occur for a different number of trials. This is called the expected frequency. You just use the probability as a proportion of the new number of trials. Notice that this is really just a simple percentage calculation. The probability is the percentage of the time that you expect this particular outcome to occur. Let me show you. Let's go back to our first example. Ben, the pistol shooter, who hits the target 72 times from 80 shots. we decided that the relative frequency was 72 out of 80, or 90%. So if on another day he shoots 20 times, how many times would you expect Ben to hit his target? The expected frequency is the probability multiplied by the number of trials. That's 90% of 20 trials, which is 18 times. Easy enough? Or our second example, the bag of coloured marbles. I got a green marble 13 times from 50 draws, so the relative frequency was 13 out of 50. How many green marbles should I expect to get if I make 220 draws? The expected frequency is the probability multiplied by the number of trials. That's 13 over 50 times 220. You might want a calculator. I need to round off my answer here to make sense in the context of the question. I would expect to pull out a green marble around 57 times.